Molly Jong-Fast will talk about her new book. She will be in conversation with our own Joyce Wadler, a sharp humor writer, formerly of the New York Times, and now author of her own clever Substack.
When Eileen called me up and said, "You want to interview Molly Jong-Fast," I had just finished her book that morning. I had gotten up at 6:30 and I thought, I got to finish this book. This is powerful. It is brutal. There's been a lot of pearl clutching about how could she talk about her mother that way. I think she'll tell us why she could talk about her mother that way. But first, Molly's a writer from a family of writers. Her grandfather was Howard Fast, who wrote Spartacus and went to jail for refusing to name names to the House Un-American Activities Committee. Her father is novelist Jonathan Fast, and her mother, of course, is Erica Jong, whose book Fear of Flying has sold over 20 million copies. Is it more now?
It was, I think, in the 70s, it was 23 million copies.
22 million. That's for a book that came out in 73. And for a time made her probably the most scandalous literary figure in the country. Molly has written 2 novels and a memoir. She published the first novel when she was 21. The memoir is titled Girl Maladjusted, which should give you a little bit of an idea of the territory we're going to be getting into today. Molly has written about being a fat, lonely kid, about her addiction to drugs and alcohol, of going into rehab at 19, and being sober since. That's about 30 years, yeah. I think.
27.
27. Still. Not 27 years. Now she's written a book about her relationship with her mother and Erica Jong's descent into dementia. It's generated praise for its honesty and wit. It sparked outrage. The Times said the book at times was like reading a score-settling, but also a loving elegy. It also made the Times bestseller list in 3 weeks. So, Molly, really happy to have you here. Yeah. Early on in this book, you write, "My mother coined an expression for casual sex, the zipless fuck." Now, think about the offspring of the person, of being the offspring of the person who wrote that sentence and pour one out for me. So, Molly, what was it like for you being the daughter of the zipless fuck?
I mean, I think the reason why this memoir, people have related to it, is not because it's the story of being the daughter of Erica Jong, but because it's the story of being a daughter. And when I sat down, so I had, for a long time, wanted to write a book. I come from books, and I come from a family of books. I understand how sacred it is to be able to write a book and what an ask it is of people to buy that book. So people had, because I had somewhat of a platform, there had been a lot, people had come to me and said, you should write a book. And like a couple years ago, a publisher came to me and they said, we have a book idea for you. We really think this is it. And I said, well, what's the idea? And they said, how women stopped Donald Trump. And I was like, and I said, that's a very stupid idea. I said, and let me tell you why I think it's a stupid idea. And also, that's not going to be a fun book to write or read. And somebody else just went, they just went down, I was like just a number on the list of people that then the next person did it. So, but the point of that story is like, I really knew I wanted to write a book that you could read in 2025 or in 2045 and be like, this is something that is real. And one of my great, and like, I feel like it's cliched to say this, but Joan Didion was one of the people whose career, if I were to make up a career I would want, it would be Joan Didion's, right? She wrote about politics in an amazing way, but she also wrote about life. She was able to write about memoir. And so that was, so A Year of Magical Thinking was for sure a template for this book, but so were things like Memoirs of a Catholic Girlhood. And, a memoir is such a rich and interesting literary tradition that I was delighted to get into it. And I think maybe like a tiny bit misleading in the fact that I was like, yes, we're gonna, like I wasn't there to like spill the tea on Erica Jong. I was there to spill the tea on myself and on what it looks like to be a daughter in the world of parents. And so that I was a little bit like, I was a little misleading with that because, I wanted to talk about the human experience. And because I don't honestly think, and I love my mom and I think she's amazing, but nobody cares. We're in a world where nobody cares about the details of this or that. It's more about the experience of what it was like.
Yeah, I think people, though, do care about the specifics. And you weren't just writing about an ordinary mother-daughter relationship. Writing about Erica Jong is like waltzing into a minefield. You had said in some of your earlier books, you talked about the narcissism, you talked about the alcoholism. You write in this book about your mother, I knew that she loved me, but I also knew that she never seemed particularly interested. This is strong stuff.
Right.
Why do you say that?
I think, again, like the goal is to sort of describe a difficult mother-daughter relationship in the way that we all relate to it. And so, yes, for sure. I also think my mom was so many of the things that were her problems, the things that kind of fouled her up were sort of larger problems that, remember, she was born in 1942. Right. So, and she was thrust into a position of being Gloria Steinem-like, and she did not have the same stuff that Gloria had. Like, Gloria is really an activist in a way that my mom was not. So she writes this novel, and it puts her on a collision course with the feminist movement in a way that I'm not totally sure she was prepared for. And so I think of her as having just really had a lot of the experiences that a lot of baby boomers have had. And this sort of coming into conflict with that, we just came from very different worlds. And I do think, and I think this is really true, that like, I don't exist, and the women of my generation do not exist without the sacrifices that my mother and the women of that generation made for us.
Your mother really didn't strike me when I read Fear of Flying as a classic feminist at all. Mm-hmm. She was feminist in that she would write very enthusiastically about sex, which I guess came as a big surprise for those people who didn't know that women could write enthusiastically about sex. Yeah. But she was very dependent on guys, so I didn't really see her as a
and that's,
feminist in that way.
And I feel like that's the central tension of her story, is that she is a woman who just wants to find a guy and find love, and she's sort of, with this book, put in the forefront of trying to, equal rights. I mean, she just wasn't the person for that moment, and it was I think it was a real conflict.
Did you see her getting beat up over this book?
Yeah.
Like how?
In this book or in Fear of Flying?
In Fear of Flying.
Fear of Flying was so. I mean, it's funny because I was watching. I did a thing on CBS, and they had found CBS file footage from 1973 when the book came out, and it was amazing. But what you could see was they clipped the question, so they just got her answer, and you could tell that the question was something like, why are you the happy hooker? You could tell, because she just came into it so defensive. And I remember my whole childhood, she would be on a panel. There was a long time ago when they used to have television that people would watch, and it was on at the time when, and, they would have these talk shows, and public intellectuals, and also not public intellectuals, would go on these talk shows. And, this is like sort of the devolution from Gore Vidal to like Geraldo, right? And,
yes.
But I would see her on these panels, and it would be like her and, the Mayflower Madam, and it was not what she had. She went to Columbia grad school, to do a PhD in English. She had not hoped to be on a panel with the Mayflower Madam, trying to differentiate their oeuvres.
Yeah, you talk a lot about celebrity. Celebrity is kind of a poison, and watching your mother desperately try and hang on to celebrity. You also talk a lot in this book about her alcoholism.
Yeah.
Do you think that celebrity somehow, or the attacks, contributed to the alcoholism, or was this something else?
So celebrity, I think, I have very mixed. I think it's the closest thing we have to magic in modern American life. It is like a powerful elixir that makes people change their feelings about you, and it gets you things. It changes the calculus of your. It's a very powerful, almost sort of magical thing. And I think it's very addictive. And I saw this with my mom, and I saw this with my grandpa. My grandfather, no one has ever loved being famous the way Howard Fast loved being famous. And look, man, he went to jail. A lot of people didn't go to jail. So I respected that. But he would, he really, when it started to wane, it was rough. And I get it, because it's like a huge, you get this sort of weird, people are sort of interested in you, and they might not have ever been interested in you. They're a little bit nicer to you. You get a restaurant reservation. So I'm not saying it's not good. You could make more money. It's more just that I think it's a brain changer. And one of the things I often ask people when I meet them, if they're famous and don't seem insane, is how did this happen to you? How did you stay not being insane? And they generally say, the worst thing you can ever be is famous when you're young, because nobody ever I have this theory that what you have to have is you have to have one person who tells you the truth. There's one person who says, you did gain 5 pounds, right? And because most people won't tell you the truth, because why would they? You're incentivized not. So I always feel if you can find one person to tell you the truth, and if you are, if you get a little bit of fame when you're in your 40s, like myself, you have a whole cadre of people who know that you're full of shit, excuse my French, and they can say to you things like, oh no, you really, that's not right.
One of the things that getting back, there's a lot about the problem to me of having two writers in a close relationship in this, and how far do you go and what do you say? Now, one of the things I really liked in this book was you didn't seem to pull any punches. You didn't shy away from the tough stuff about you. You didn't shy away from the tough stuff about your mother. You talked about you as 19 on your way to Hazleton and having, 3 vodkas, 2 Klonopin, and 3 glasses of wine. You talk about your mother's alcoholism, which seemed to be there throughout your entire childhood. Her need to be the center of attention, including a very interesting toast at Ken Follett's
Endless.
marriage.
Many toasts.
Many toasts.
Yeah.
Her worsening dementia when you find shit in the bed and you don't know whether it's hers or the dog's.
Yeah.
That's pretty.
And that was the thing that I think got people upset. But why? First of all, I want to say, and again, we had been locked in a situation, my mom and I, where she always wrote about me, always, endlessly, and mostly pretty nice, except there was one book where I thought I really got it, Fear of Dying. And she often, and she had always said, you will write about me. This is we are in a contract here. A contract, by the way, that I was really too young to make, but sure. And actually, there's a really good piece in the New York Times about a nonfiction, really smart nonfiction piece about how writing about your children is not child abuse, which I thought was exactly right. It's not, it's not 100% kosher, but it's not abuse. It's just sort of in that.
Well, let's hold on 1 second there,
Yeah.
because there were some things that you discussed in the book that I thought were pretty damn close to abuse, and it
Right.
seemed like you did too. For instance, you have 3 kids, and you talk about the delivery of your twins
Yes.
in a teaching hospital.
Yeah, at Mount Sinai.
There are students in the room, there are doctors,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, there's a lot of blood, and take the story.
Well, so I don't know. So I had a very bad, I don't think one of the many good qualities I have inherited from my mother is that I sometimes just sort of think, well, this will probably be okay. And they kept saying, this may not be okay. And I had all these like problems with being pregnant for the second time with twins and all sorts of diabetes and this and that. And I had just this very bad delivery that became very, dicey and just a lot of problems. And during it, it was like probably the closest I've come to really thinking, oh, this may be the end of it. And I could hear the doctors because I was awake. And they were saying stuff that you don't want doctors saying about you. Like that, this is my hottest take. Like, you don't want this, more blood. This is not how it's supposed to go. I'm slipping. Someone get in here with a mop. And that was the last. And then they were,
Yeah.
but it was like very traumatic for me. And my mom wrote about it. And that was, I don't think that's abuse, because I think it's, but this is the writer-writee relationship, is that you don't ever get to say uncle, right? Once you're locked in that kind of death spiral, there's no way out. So as much as, I don't know, I feel very, I know that if she were in there, my mom would be celebrating this book. Like, she would be. She would say, we don't agree on some of the facts, but did I mention it was on the New York Times bestseller list? That's what she would say. She would say, did you see the New York Times review? She would say, did you see? So,
Yeah. I saw a quote with her where there was a story in the Times where she expected you to write this sort of book.
Oh, yeah.
But let's go back to what she wrote about that and what you wrote about what she wrote about that.
Yes.
We're getting into a hall
Yes,
of
meta.
mirrors,
Yeah.
which is she writes a book in which you are a tangential character. You're
But
given
still
a
a little
pseudonym
anti-Semitic.
in which she talks about you exaggerating, you
Yes.
telling the story of this
Yes.
birth, and every time you tell it,
Yes.
it becomes more dramatic, and you're bleeding more,
Yes,
and you're
yes.
suffering more.
yes.
And you say, imagine.
I have to say, I would not have known about this had my husband not read the book very studiously and outlined the many ways that he felt he was made into an anti-Semitic stereotype. I'm very offended.
Yes.
And so then it got elevated to the point of where he said, you have to read this part, and I'm sending you that part. But yeah, no, it's not good.
Not good. And what it made me wonder was, did you or your mother ever sit down and say, enough, let's make a pact where we don't write about one another?
No.
No.
Certainly not. Well, first of all,
Wait, why certainly not? Why certainly not?
First of all, there were only one person in the relationship who would have been capable of doing that. It would have been me. And so it's like if I had said to her, let's make a deal. You won't write about me anymore. First of all, at that point, we would have been 27, 28, 30 years into her writing about me. So, I mean, okay. And then the other thing is that ultimately, she was not going to stick to it. So I could do whatever I want, but it's not going to mean anything. So, no, I didn't. And the other, writing, I mean, when you're that, she had written about everyone. She had written about my aunts. I mean, I remember there was a ceremony at Barnard where she was being honored, and one of my aunts showed up. And she went in on, how she felt that there was a really Islamophobic caricature of her husband in the book and how he had died. I mean, it was, I was very much not damaged the way everyone else was. So, I think that is an important caveat. I feel from the expression on your face that you're not the
not
joyousness
damaged. They're
of
not
this
damaged.
is lost on you.
I'm not. Well, who knows? But I mean, you're the only one who can answer that. But getting to your mother's illness and what's going on right now, you write in your book that your mother was always a little dreamy, a little distracted. So it was kind of tricky to put your finger on when it really had turned into something medical. Can you tell us about when you did realize something is going on?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think the reason why people like this book is because it's about what do you do? Like, what is the moment? And in fact, it's funny because one of the characters in the book, her daughter called me to talk about her mother and how she was worried that she may have some memory stuff. And I said to her this thing, which I hope is the truism of the book, which is that anything you do in this situation is right. It's just such a hard situation. There is no right answer. The right answer is the best you can do. And I mean, what's been so interesting about this book is like when I go talk to people, they come up to me and they tell me these stories of what they did. And no one did it right. Like, and we all did it right. So, but just to this, I will actually answer your question because I can see you looking at me like, why aren't you answering my question?
Yeah.
But that's because one of the great tricks of being on television is that you never, ever, ever have to answer the question at all. Like, that's the one thing I understand is that I just talk about something else.
We got time. So what made you realize this has gotten serious?
I feel like I've been matched here. So I knew it was bad because my stepfather had Parkinson's and I came over and he was opening something with a very sharp knife and shaking. And I thought, oh, he's going to cut himself and I'm going to have to take him to the hospital. Yeah. And my husband is in the hospital right now and I can't have more than one person in the hospital at a time. And that was when, and you know, it just mushroomed. But I had this weird relationship with my parents because I didn't know what was the appropriate amount of getting in there and doing their lives for them. And that, you know, I had to wait until it was so bad that it seemed like there were no other choices. I don't think everyone has to do that.
You write about an instance where someone approaches you about an inappropriate comment your mother has made
every
on Facebook.
Day. Yeah.
This was about her mother's death. And what had your mother written when she posted about her mother's death?
She had said something like neat. Now, the internet is very hard. So in some ways, I mean, I had had a lot of experiences with people coming over to me saying like, oh, you know, and so I wasn't shocked by it, but in this case, I felt like it was part of a larger problem, a pattern that seemed like it meant she was sort of out of control.
Yeah, you talk about COVID, and COVID was, your mother's now married or had been married at the time you were writing this book to her fourth husband.
Yeah.
And that COVID was, in a way, an excuse for them to remain at home and drink and hide out from the world. And then when COVID ended, they remained hiding in the world. So it was kind of hard to keep track. And then you go into 2023, which looks like it is possibly the worst year in anyone's life who is not getting bombed. Can you talk about what happens in 2023?
I would say, like with COVID, we did need them to be careful. So that's not, I think she did the right thing because they had to do that. And this is something that I noticed even in my COVID experience was, and this is like a brain thing, when you don't have a lot of change in your days, the days become very hard to keep track, to make distinctions from. And so that actually is something that a lot of us had. But for sure, I remember the last conversation I had with her before COVID where she said, I'm going to go to this party with these Italians. And I said, you can't, it's in Milan. You can't go to party with Italians. They're all going to have COVID. And she didn't go. But I think that for me, my terrible year, that was what you were asking me. Yeah. So 2023, I started to see my mom just disappear, and I thought, I think I should write about this because this is something, I had been coming to visit her, and I'd run into other friends who had parents the same age who were having these terrible situations. So I said, I think think this story, that other people are going through this, so I can write about it in a way that other people can relate to. And then as that was happening, I was selling this book, and my husband, who is a terrible hypochondriac, said, I am having a pain. And I said, okay. And he said, I'm going to the hospital. And I said, good luck. I said, I'm not going to the hospital with you. Unless you're dying, I'm not. I have spent so much time at the hospital. So he then calls me on the way home from the hospital. They found a lump in my pancreas, and they think it's pancreatic cancer. And I was like, it's, to be an anxious person who has spent much of their life like struggling with health anxiety, to have something that's like definitive like that is kind of incredible. And I just remember thinking like, that can't be right. And then we just started getting into the whole what that looks like of cancer treatment and the doctor, and I write a lot about that. And I think that is actually something like a third of all Americans will get cancer. So that's crazy numbers, and so I think it's not wildly unusual, though. It did bring up a lot of feelings and a lot of self-pity because he was a lot younger than a lot of the other patients, but then it just was an interesting way to look at the world, and especially to look at what our purpose on this planet is, which when you start getting into this kind of, I've been having this sort of slow rolling middle-age crisis for the last decade, so I spend a lot of time sort of getting into that, and that is part of the experience, I think.
We talked a little bit before this about, so it's 2023. Your husband is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. What turns out to be
neuroendocrine pancreatic.
Yeah. But a thing on his pancreas that is
that has
cancerous.
metastasized.
You don't want, you don't want to know about. You've decided that your mother really is deteriorating, and as well as her husband, and they have to go into a nursing home. You're dealing with 3 kids. I think at least 2 are high school age. You're working at least 2 jobs.
Yeah.
And I keep seeing over and over in this book, I'm a horrible daughter.
Yes.
I'm such a horrible daughter. And I kept thinking, how could she's dealing with pancreatic cancer, kids, jobs. Why did you keep thinking you were a horrible daughter?
And I want to add that weeping on my way to 30 Rock, like in the car, just crying, getting there, just weeping. And then also, like, my stepfather then dies. My father-in-law, who had been a father for 20 years, dies. My aunt dies. Like, there's this one part where we're at this same funeral home, and they come out because they've seen us so many times. And at the end, and they were like, are you okay? And I thought, like, this is probably not good. But at the end of the year, I thought, maybe it's me. Like, maybe I am like a Horcrux, and then it just ended. Like, it was weirdly a sort of strange experience. But why did I feel guilty? I felt guilty because this is not how I wanted to do it. Like, I'd wanted to move her to the basement apartment of my townhouse. I don't have a townhouse, but you know what I mean? Like, I had wanted to put her in the guest cottage. I had wanted to, she is my mother. She is, like, fundamentally, I don't exist without her. She was the person who gave me the entitlement to think that I could be on television as a middle-aged woman. You know what I mean? Like, she was the person who said, you should be in the New York Times multiple times. And, you don't do that stuff unless you have someone who is telling you that you are entitled to stuff that no one is entitled to in any way, shape, or form. So I think that it was not how I wanted it. It was not the kind of way I wanted it to go. So I felt terribly.
What is your mother's condition right now?
I saw her on Friday. She's.
Did she recognize you?
She does. She sort of does. She knows it's me. I mean, the thing is, like, the thing that I think is so important when we talk about this is that it's not we are not, my fantasy of what it should be like for her is irrelevant. My experience of how she is not relevant to her. And one of the things I was thinking about was a couple weeks ago, before another visit, I visited her, and as I was leaving, I saw this woman in a wheelchair by herself on the street, and I thought, oh, this is terrible. This poor woman, the aide must have left her in this wheelchair by herself on the street. And I look at her, I get around her face, and she is smoking a cigarette, and she is having the best time of her. Like, I should have had a minute of the kind of pleasure that woman was having from that cigarette. And I thought, everything I think about this is wrong.
How so?
Because, like, I'm sitting here going, this poor woman has been abandoned by her aide, and she is just sitting there.
Oh, no, I understand with the woman in the wheelchair, but what about your mother? There's
Just
always
that
your
there's
mother's
not, that
reality.
Right, that her reality is, you know, is okay, and that it doesn't have to be my reality, and that my anxiety or my stress about her reality is not relevant.
Have you shown her this book? Does she know you've written
she
this
knows
book?
She knows I've written it. I mean, she knew I wrote it the last time I saw the last time I talked to her about it. She doesn't have like object permanence, but you know what I mean. Like, I could say I wrote a book, and she'd be like, "That's wonderful," you know. So like, I wrote a book. So, but I don't think she knows that. But I think that if she were 100%, she would. I think she would be delighted.
Would you show it to her?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, have you tried to say to her, "Ma, I wrote a book about you and our relationship," and
No, but I've done things like I've shown her pictures of it. I've shown her from the New York Times. I've been like, look, it's on the bestseller list. But I don't, you know, she really likes to watch me on television sometimes. So, and that's good. And then, you know, I just want to be there for her experience of what it is. I don't want to make her, you know, she is where she is at this moment, you know, not to get too Yogi Berra.
Yeah. Well, there's still the whole thing of, how could you do this to your mother? How could you betray these intimate, horrible moments in your mother's life?
That doesn't count. When the person has written about you so much, I think you get a pass. But I also think, like, it's not, I also feel like...
I thought I heard a whoa.
I know.
There.
Well,
I think we're going to get a little...
But the other part of it, I think, is that, like, it's not just that she wrote about me. It's that her whole life was the belief that you sit down and open a vein. That you get, when you write, that you have this sacred covenant with the reader to tell them everything. And if you don't tell them everything, then you don't bother. And so... ultimately, and I know she had said to me, you know, you will write your book, and they will be about me, and they will not be unsparing. I mean, she said stuff like that to me all the time. And even, like, so I was really careful with my children, but I have one kid who's a writer.
Uh-oh.
I was mostly careful because I was worried about the environment we're in right now, and I didn't want anything to happen to them. But I have one kid who's a writer, and she read this book, she was the first one to read it.
Yeah.
And I want her to write that book. Like, I don't feel, and maybe this is a pathology that my mother and I both share, but I don't feel that writing a book about me and my many foibles, right, will be a betrayal in any way, shape, or form. Even if that book is not, you know, my mother is the greatest.
I just found myself flashing on privacy, the concept.
Right. Well, I mean,
listen.
You know,
no, listen. I've written about members of my family, and I've had them scream their heads off.
Right.
And I stop.
I mean,
because they scare me.
Well, what I did with this book, which I think is important, is so I tried to spare people who were not famous or who were not. So, for example, my grandfather has two children, my father and my aunt, and he was not a great father, but he was cool, but he wasn't a great father, and he was really pretty terrible to my father, and so I wrote about that. My aunt called me up and said, you know, he was terrible to me too. And I said, no, I know he was terrible to you too, but I felt that because you're a private person, that I shouldn't be drudging up your relationship. And since you weren't completely germane to the story, I thought I'd keep it out of there. And so, I mean, I think it is a question of, all of this is sort of a question of like public-private figure. That was my feeling. And like I did let my father read it. I did let the people who were, you know.
Did they ask for changes, and did you make them?
I did not. I was not real open to changes. So I did not, I felt that I had been careful enough with them, and I really, the idea of making changes for a family member really, I mean, I didn't put my kids in there, and maybe had my kids been in there, I would have been open to it, but I really felt like, you know, you don't let this, I mean, I just feel like it feels it feels like access journalism. I mean, obviously it's not, but and I have, you know, access with your own family is. But it just feels icky to me to let people edit your work who are not editors, but who are vested parties.
But you're writing about their private
If my
life.
dad had been really made a stink, maybe I would have. But I really tried to be like, this is the finished book. It would be really expensive to change anything.
That's a great cop-out.
Yeah.
Well, now, of course, there are revisions. Are there any in the middle of the night moments where you're going through, oh, shit, I really shouldn't have said that?
No, but there's one part where I got the person wrong. So I had thought, but it's not so exciting. It was, well, I mean, it's a little exciting. My grandmother had an affair, we think, with Dashiell Hammett, and I had put Raymond Carver. Oh. And sorry, you know, and Jay McInerney was like, I think you mean Dashiell Hammett. And I was like, oops. So that was bad. But, you know, I don't tell the Carver estate, but that wasn't so good.
Yes, but nobody is around to complain about it. And there isn't that loss of dignity, say, when you're describing some of the pretty rough stuff that you do go into with your mother.
The one other thing I will say, and I sound defensive, I have this theory that you should never defend yourself, because if you're defending yourself, you're losing. So I say this in the spirit of not being defensive, but seeming defensive.
Well, I was challenging you, so go ahead. You really should be defensive.
I'll take it. Is that Erica Jong really cared about her literary legacy. And in fact, I would love to do a moment here about how she really resented people like Norma Mailer, because they really got, you know, Norma Mailer really got what she wanted. Now, of course, Norma Mailer completely like lost to history, right? I mean, but the people who made her really jealous and furious, Norma Mailer, I don't know that she was so, I think she was jealous of Gore Vidal, certainly. And I think the Gore Vidal legacy will live on in a way that, like, we just haven't come back to him yet, but I think we will. But a lot of those people who were the hot people during the 80s and 90s have sort of disappeared. So, but she really cared about her literary legacy, and she made me her literary executor with the thought that I would then get the Erica Jong legacy to continue on, which, of course, as a writer, is a complete fool's errand, but, you know, worth a shot.
I think we should turn this over to people who are far more serious than I am, and maybe they'll ask you about,
serious
the literary serious questions.
That literary legacy.
About maybe the way Nora Ephron and your mother didn't get on. And
that is the great, by the way, one of the great stories.
Oh,
the Nora Ephron.
Hold off, I'm not getting up to my phone yet. Tell me about this. Why didn't she and Nora get along?
Well, they were best friends. Yeah. And Jacob and I were born 3 months apart, and it was like this, you know, they were both having these first children, and they were these feminists in their 30s, in their late 30s, which in the 70s was considered to be kind of insane to have kids that late. And they were best friends, and they were in consciousness raising groups together. Like, there you go. And Jacob said he found his mother's date book, and it had all sorts of Erica Jong, date with Erica Jong. I think my mom just got jealous of Nora's incredible success and couldn't handle it. Which
Yeah.
I would be too. I mean, she did really well.
Yeah, she did. She did. It annoyed all of we feature writers of the same generation. It did. But you do have a scene in which your mother goes into drunken toast and
Yeah.
Nora is rolling her eyes.
Yeah, that was
and
bad.
It didn't.
Not good. It did not make me, was not a great moment, no.
Should we turn this over to questions?
Yes,
I don't know
sure.
who's going to.
My name is Ellen Freilich. I was, just before I started the book, when I was on the cusp of starting it, I was wondering whether you had read Susan Cheever's book, which
Yes.
which
Oh.
then I sort of saw that she was mentioned at the very end.
Yeah, no,
and in the book too, Susan is that Susan Cheever?
Yes,
I mean, she's quite a bit older than you are. But,
yes.
yeah.
She is one of my people in this world, and I love her, and I am so grateful for the knowledge she has imparted on me, and she's just the best. So I actually was talking to her on the way here. So she's, you can't do better. And also, I might add, was written about way more than I was, in a much meaner way, I thought. Because, I never died in any of the books. So, I mean, there's still time, but, I'm quite pleased to have never fictitiously died.
Back here, Molly.
Hi, my name is Clifford Sobel. How did bearing witness to your mother's challenges and the symptoms they presented affect you as a child and then replay themselves as an adult?
Oh, yeah. Just endlessly. I mean, that was the thing, and that's one of the themes of this book is you can absolutely get stuck in your childhood. And in fact, one of the things that I wrote, which I think is maybe the smartest thing I've ever cooked up, is that when you are those good childhoods, people are just desperate to get back to. They're just so nostalgic. And the bad childhoods, you just can never leave. So I absolutely, one of the things I've noticed when I was working on this book was that I just could not get out of my own childhood. And I did lots of really dysfunctional things in order to try to, I sort of stopped doing it, but I did a lot of weird stuff with my own kids to get them to try to do things that I couldn't do or go to schools that I wasn't able to go to so I definitely, it was not good.
Thank you. I think I went to high school, music and art, with your mother. She was a year ahead of me. Given what you said about Nora Ephron, did you consciously adopt her mantra that everything is copy? And you might have touched on this, but did you actually consciously leave stuff out because you said, no, this is just too unpleasant or too intimate, I just won't go there?
So everything is copied, yes. They gave it to me, right? I didn't get it from, they that was the ethos they both had, was that everything was copy. And Jacob is a good friend of mine, and I think he's much less damaged by his parents, but he might disagree. So I would say there's nothing in the book that in our relationship is not in there, in the way that it happened, or at least the way it felt like it happened to me. Because the whole point of her, the whole spirit of her was that you tell the uncomfortable truth that makes you look terrible too. So I wanted that in there. There are things about I was careful with my dad. I felt like the man had been through enough. And I had a certain nachas, I think that's the wrong word, but for the men she had married and written about, because I felt like it was not necessarily a choice. But that also then, when I had to write about my husband, because here was someone who had really not a public person, who had sort of stumbled into this scenario, and then had gotten cancer, and that was a little bit. I think that was really tough on him.
Was there a time when you and your mother sat down and did try to hash things out? Were you able to say some of this to her in person or not so much?
No, we always said everything to each other. It's just, it's not, what I think is, like, there's nothing in this book where she would be like, I can't believe she wrote this. She'd be like, oh, and then there was this time at the Beverly Hills Hotel. No, she wouldn't, like, you cannot look at this relationship through normal lenses. Like, I would sit down with her and say, like, I do not like the anti-Semitic stereotype that you have made my husband in this book. He is very offended. And she would say, so shoot me. Put bullets through me. I am a writer. This is what I do. And I would say, okay. So it was just that kind of thing. I mean, I could have, we could sit down and I could say, I don't like the way you did this and said that, and she would be like, I am an imperfect person. So it was like, okay.
So it's all talked out. When she is gone, you will not feel regret.
I don't feel regret now. I mean, the funny thing is that, like, for a minute when I finished this book, I thought, oh my God, I've ruined my life. I thought I finally got out of being Erica Jong's daughter. I'm on television. I write these columns for Vanity Fair. People like them. I do this podcast. Some people don't even know. They think I'm related to Kim Jong. They don't know. I thought I'm out, man. I'm out. And then I write this book where I'm like, oh, just so you guys know, all of this is because my mom is Eric Jong. And I thought, this is such a stupid, what was I thinking? And for a whole weekend, I thought, this is a terrible idea. And then it hit the New York Times bestseller list, and I was like, I am a genius. And I just felt like, I really did feel like I did a good job, and it's pretty smart, and it's helped some people, and, I made a little money, and so,
Perhaps, hi, Arthur Sulzberger. Perhaps the best rule of parenting that I'm aware of is the job of a parent is to pass on less pain to their children than you received as a child. Mm-hmm. And you, how are you doing on that?
I think that's totally right. And in fact, like with my mom, my grandmother was a nightmare. Like, she was a horrible mother. I mean, she was so mean to my mother. I would see my grandmother just say horrible things to my mother. And my mother was so loving to me. I mean, she never, she was like, do you know you're a genius? And I would say, well, I'm not totally sure that's correct. And she'd say, no, I know you're a genius. So I think that's right. I mean, I think that the goal is to just be better. And that's why with my friend whose mother has dementia, I said, it's like there's no right answers here. This is the kind of thing, when you get to this point, you just have to do the best you can.
Spencer Rumsey, how did you and your mother regard the acclaim or the intellectual pantheon that Susan Sontag occupied?
That's a good question. I think Mom didn't like Susan Sontag. There was a little bit of, I don't know if you know this, but there's a little bit of jealousy going on in this. And by the way, my grandfather also, this is one of my favorite stories about my grandfather, was that he hated Kirk Douglas, okay? And Kirk Douglas, the star of Spartacus, arguably the reason why all of these people were famous. And he would say to me, he didn't think of any of those lines. We wrote the lines. And I said, I think people know that the actors don't think of it. He said, no. He said, I knew that he was really taking credit for my work. And so I do think it's really important to view this as like, there are people like my daughter who read Sontag for Sontag. And there are people like my mother who read Sontag for like, no, that should have been me. So I think there was a fair amount of that.
Amy Nutt, my question, one of the most powerful aspects of your book is actually your sobriety at 19.
Thank you.
Which I actually think you don't dwell enough on.
Yes.
And I wonder, there's so much about your childhood and your upbringing that drove you to alcoholism, regardless of the hereditary aspect.
is there anything about your relationship with your mother or your father or your stepfather that helped you to gain your sobriety and that keeps you sober today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, yes, I did get sober at 19. My stepfather, who did not get a ton of credit in the book, was actually kind of great. And he connected me with my AA sponsor. He was never an alcoholic and had really almost no knowledge of alcoholism and enabled my mother in many different ways. But for some reason, he was amazing with me. And he did, in fact, introduce me to someone who still sponsors me. And he stopped drinking. He just stopped drinking when I went to rehab and never drank again, which was like just a very weirdly, we were a family that had boxes and boxes from Sherry Lehman every month. So it was, and he had taken sommelier courses. So it was actually kind of a big deal. And really kind of moving. And but I subscribe to the genetic component of alcoholism. My grandmother was an alcoholic. My mother was an alcoholic. So I do think I look at my kids and I say, you come from a family riddled with alcoholism. They now can do an impression of me doing it, which I think is the key.
Molly, I want to thank you for coming. And we love it.